This is an instructional video for operating the BICOM Biosurveys. We're going to start with the basic BICOM Biosurvey. What you're seeing on your screen is the master control panel for the Zyto5 Elite. You start with choosing a client. You can either create a new client, just click on this tab. It's required to fill in the yellow fields, recommended to fill in the orange field for email, and you can certainly fill in the rest of these as well. We're going to start with an existing client. This is one that I use just for testing and for instruction, so it's a fictitious client. Open a new session, which then opens this tab here. This is the Elite Master screen, and from here you can operate a lot of different functions. You can do manual scans, or you can run biosurveys, and you can do potentization and dosing and outputs and moving the data from stressor to balancer table. We'll get into that later. For now, we're going to just start with a basic biosurvey. So we click on the Biosurveys tab. Open up your BICOM Optima library here just by clicking on the BICOM Optima. And if you're using the BICOM 2000, select the BICOM 2000 Basic Biosurvey. If you're using the Optima, select the one that just says BICOM Basic Biosurvey. So both of these are identical except that the BICOM Optima Biosurvey also includes some additional programs that are unique to the Optima. And then there is a final balance scan with stored substance complexes. And those features are not in the BICOM 2000. So pick your biosurvey based on the type of device that you're using. So I'm going to click on BICOM Basic Biosurvey. And as soon as I click on it, it's going to ask me if I'm going to test via the hand cradle or in simulated mode. You only want to click on simulated mode if you're just testing out different biosurveys to see how they run without actually having a patient connected. So this simulated mode does not actually test an individual. It's just a simulation of how the program runs. So it can go very quickly. But right now we're going to go ahead and do an actual scan. So I'm clicked on hand cradle and ask it to connect, and it begins. So the first thing it does is it scans through what are called 35 neutral stressors, which means that it's getting information for a baseline. And the baseline is also called the range. So this range is determined for the individual based on what their baseline energy level is. And the system will use that information as a deciding point for what is causing stress versus what is not causing stress. At this point you can see it's running through organs, vertebral segments, and this is real time, so this is how long it's actually going to take to scan a patient. Now meridians, which are traditional Chinese medicine energy fields. Now it's going through geopathic stress fields and chakras. It's compiling that data. Now we're going to start scanning on the actual BICOM therapies. So it just went through chakra treatments. Now it's going through some immune regulation programs, blockages, organs of elimination support programs, going through some of the low deep frequency programs as well. And now basic therapies. When it's finished with this, it's going to do what's called a comparative rescan. This means that the stress panel, or the stressors, the out-of-range stressors, are going to be rescanned with the balancers in the circuit. So it's going to do that one by one in order so we can see which stressors are relieved by which BICOM programs. And if it did a good job and the stress levels weren't too high, we usually find that all of the stressors are resolved by the BICOM programs. There are some cases in which this will not be the case, and in those cases you can then choose to rescan other categories of programs or other types of therapies if your practice allows for that. So this is the report that we have now, and you can see that it starts with an introduction stating that it's evaluating which BICOM bioresonance therapy programs are best indicated to resolve the stress points. And there is kind of graphical representation of this to see where the most stress lies, and then which BICOM programs are going to help resolve that. So the biosurvey helps us to determine the body's biological preference for these programs. The actual changes initiated by these therapies will be occurring over the next few days to weeks. As you know, as a BICOM practitioner, the changes can start occurring very rapidly, but they take time. Everything takes time. So right now my baseline range is 7.19, and these numbers are considered a deviation ratio away from that. Whether it's a positive or a negative value doesn't really matter. We're looking for the deviation away from the baseline. Some people can interpret a positive to mean inflammation and a negative to mean lack of energy. It may have something to do with that, but it may not. So it's primarily what we're looking for is the magnitude of deviation away from the baseline range of 7.19 in this case. So as we can see, uterus, first cervical, fourth sacral vertebra, gallbladder meridian, fifth cervical vertebra, thymus, third cervical, and so on down. In there we also see some meridians, some geopathic stress. And then as we get down to where it's just very barely out of range, 7.21. Okay. Next page is showing the BICOM bioresonance therapies, which should bring the system back into balance. And these are in order in which they should be run. So first a basic therapy, followed by lumbar spine complaints, then chronic lung meridian, connective tissue treatment, chakra therapy, liver meridian treatment, and then a stored substance complex for fungal infection. Given the time of year and all of the flu bugs going around, it's not too surprising to see some of this lung and liver and fungal complaints. These next images show how each successive BICOM bioresonance therapy brings the body closer to balance. So we started with 36 biomarkers out of range. The basic therapy brought 10 back into range. The lumbar spine complaints program brought in an additional 16, so that one certainly looks indicated. And then the lung meridian chronic brought in the rest. So you will see this commonly also with these biosurveys in that not all of those programs that it initially tested for ended up being needed. In this case, only 3, which makes me happy because I'm actually testing myself right now. So this is another chart looking at exactly which stresses were brought back into range by each successive program. So the basic therapy definitely made some improvements, but even better, the lumbar spine complaints program and the lung meridian chronic program. Those seemed to be the most significant of all. So would you really want to go forward and do all of these programs? Probably not. That might be overtreatment because it doesn't appear that it was really needed. So in this particular case, I'd probably just run the first 3 and then not worry about running the others. The body may not need all of that treatment today, but the first 3 definitely looked very helpful. When we get to the very bottom, there is a field that you can type in additional notes. And to do that, you click up here in the upper right-hand corner for Edit. This takes you to the Report section. You're going to come down to the Additional Notes block and click on that. This opens up an editable field. So right here, I'm going to say the first 3 BICOM programs were needed today. And then you can make recommendations for other therapies. Okay. Then you just click on the OK in the upper left corner. It's going to amend that report. And if we go down to the bottom of it, we will see those notes that I just typed in. The first 3 BICOM programs were needed today. I recommend a follow-up therapy in 1 week. Now from here, you can email this report to the client, and you can type in additional notes here. Okay, and then just send. And this is a fictitious email that I created, so it may not actually go anywhere. It may give me a note saying it was invalid or it's not going to send through. But if it was a valid email, it would certainly send on through. In this case, it's taking too long, so it's probably not going to find it, so I'm just going to cancel that. So from here, you can go back to the Elite and see the representation of what we just saw on the report. So these were the initial stressors. This was the first measurement, or the first deviation ratio, and this is the second one, showing that they are all under the initial range of 7.19. Anything in green means it's come back into range. And then here again are the basic therapy, lumbar spine complaints, lung meridian, and so on. These are the programs needed. Now, if for some reason there was not resolution of the stress profile by doing these programs and you still had some of these biomarkers out of range, you would see them as red dots outside the circle here. You could then go in and do some additional balancing. To do that, you can run a manual balance scan. And this can be done as either a linear scan or a binary scan. The linear scan tests through things one at a time. The binary scan takes groups. This is great for large groups of items like homeopathic remedies. It'll take a large group of items and divide them into 2 sections and then test the biological preference for each section. In that section that has the highest DR, or biological preference, it will split that again into 2 and test again and keep going, so on down the line until you get down to 1 item. But it will only end up with 1 item. When you do the linear scan, you'll get a list showing everything and how it scored. So let's take a look at some of these things, and let's look at the BICOM programs. So I'm going to unselect all libraries and just select BICOM Optima. Even the 2000 programs are in the BICOM Optima library, but they will have a 2000 after them in the categories. So you can see there's 3,261 library items in the BICOM Optima library. So let's say that I knew about this particular patient, that they were having some reproductive issues. As you remember, the uterus was most out of balance. So I'm going to look at hormonal system therapies. And categories will not have a number associated with them. The number is the BICOM program. But I'm going to look at the category of programs. So I'm going to click on the hormonal disorders and triple warmer under BICOM Optima. And if you had the 2000, you would choose the 2000 program. So I'm going to click on the name, and it will open up all of the BICOM programs within that category. They're already pre-checked, so I'm going to go ahead and test through all of them. And to do that, I click on this big arrow in the center of the screen and move them over here. Now it's telling me that there is a program in here, and there may be, actually there are 4, so it says there are 3 more conflicts after this that are recommended for males only. And because we're testing a female, I'm not going to put them in there. You can choose to use them anyway, or you can skip it. So I'm going to check the box, skip. There we go. Okay, so it skipped those programs that were specific to males only. So now I've added these items, put the patient's hand back on the hand cradle, and click on Next. And it's going to go through these 64 programs, one by one, and test the biological preference for each one. This takes a very short amount of time, especially when you compare it to kinesiology or tensor testing, which can take a very long time if you wanted to test through this many programs. Either your patient's arm would fatigue or your tensor wire would break after a while. Okay, so here is the list of the biological preference. With balancers, you want to choose the one that has the highest biological preference in most cases. In some cases, you'll find that the highest biological preference item is actually too strong for the patient, too stimulating. But in this case, this looks like a pretty mild therapy. It's just a meridian chronic treatment. So I'm going to go ahead and check that item. And this VSI, or virtual stimulus item, will be moved to the balance table. Click on Next. And there it is. It's in the balancer table, but as you can see, it's missing this triangle right here. And this means that it is not in the circuit yet. So we put it on the table, but it's not included in the circuit with all of the treatments. So make sure that you put it in the circuit if you're going to rescan. And so you just click on that space. So there, it's clicked in. Okay. If I had any more red items or things that were out of range still, I could do another rescan, in which case this green circle here would not be grayed out. It would be available. And so that's what I would click on for a rescan. When you're looking back at the reports, in some cases you will see more than one report. If you click on Select Report, if there is a report in here that also has what's called a practitioner copy that's been created, you will see it listed here as well. And then you can also combine those two reports if you wish. I created some of these to have a practitioner copy because you don't need all of this paperwork in your files, but it is nice to have the client copy go to the client so that they have the graphical representation and the full color. They can print that out on their printer at home, or they can look at it on their computer screen at home. I hope this has been helpful, and we will go through these biosurveys one by one just to give you some additional help in how they run. Thank you.